So welcome today to Midnight's 6.3 training module series. And today we'll be looking at our inventory module. In particular, we'll be focusing on how to set up your warehouses, how to create new inventory items, how to receive inventory for existing and for new items, how to review and micromanage inventory transactions such as adding, subtracting, moving, and adjusting inventory counts. And we'll also look at how to create pickup and delivery tickets. Finally, we'll take a brief look at our inventory app, the iDevice application, which we have available for inventory addition and management. And we'll skim over some reports before coming to a close. Before we jump in, I'll take a look at our admin menu under the global settings and a couple of other areas in here in which we'll see the controllers for several of our drop-downs across various areas we'll be touching today. Within our global settings, we do have a definition for the auto deduction of inventory on orders. Depending on which one of the actual drop date or close date is checked, this will allow the user that is applying a drop date or close date to an order to have an auto deduction message triggered, in which the user is prompted to pick where they would like to pull any inventory on the job from, bearing in mind that the system will automatically generate the location in which to pull the inventory from based on transaction date or based on your lot tracking information that you have listed just under it. Additionally, the version checkbox allows you to manually trigger a deduction of inventory based on the version of the order in which you're in. You'll find this in the inventory tab of that version. And if you don't handle versioning within orders, it will simply be the inventory tab within the order itself. We also have under the inventory submenu two choices: the display inventory subs link on orders, which when enabled allows you to take advantage of substitution inventory that you can assign to an item, allowing your users to have a different item recommended in lieu of the absence of a particular item for the requirements of job completion. And the inventory reorder point email notification, which sends out an email to you or whichever email or email addresses you have, comma separated, with an alert of any inventory that has a reorder point that has a balance or reorder quantity crossed through it. This does require that your inventory point be met. So for instance, if you have an item that has a reorder point of 500 and your count or balance of 1,000 were to be subtracted by 500, because it meets or falls below that reorder point, an email will be sent out. Additionally, for the locations in which we store our inventory, all of those controllers are micromanaged within the warehouse menu. Under here, you can create your different bays, sections, shelves, and of course warehouses in which those bays, shelves, and slots are stored in. You can create new instances by filling in a new record within the bottom dark gray menu table choice, and by clicking the Save Disk to commit that record. You can also click the X button to remove any of your bays that you intentionally don't need or other aspects in which you just no longer need in here. And should the menu provide you with the ability to fill in several different options, you'll find the ability to edit those records by clicking the Edit button here and making changes to whichever choice you need. You'll notice in this case now, I am in the warehouse locations list. In here, this assumes I have already created a section, bay, shelf, as well as a location type. and warehouse in which to have my location stored at. In this process, you can click the column header to apply a sort based on whichever field you click. And you can also use a filtering option within the drop-downs of the top portion of any of our search screens to run filters and see only data that falls within that category. To add new cases in an area such as this, where you have drop-down options available, you can pick and choose any of the drop-down choices in which you've created within your admin menus already. And do note that your description for a warehouse location must be unique. You cannot have two shelf A's with a location of a different warehouse, for instance. It will have to actually be spelled out as a unique instance of a name, so you don't have duplicate location names to select when handling any inventory transactions. The warehouse choices are a little bit different. These are effectively the buildings in which you set up for inventory storage. After you've set up a warehouse, you can create your locations and then return back in here to set up a default receiving location. This default receiving location is where inventory is deposited into if you are using an iDevice or the inventory app to pull your inventory into the system. And after this is defined, then either the default location or any of these selected locations from your admin table can be used for adding, pulling, or relocating inventory as needed. We also have under the warehouse module item types. These are the different kinds of inventory categorization tools you can use to sort your inventory based on type. For instance, you'll see in here I have various different kinds of paper, such as letterhead, envelopes, 9x12 envelopes for a more detailed instance, or just some other types of paper or stock. You'll see I have some other choices in here, such as computer, self-mailers, and business cards or credit cards. These choices can exist as pretty much anything that you would categorize an item as. And if they were to be available within your print calculators, such as the standard or wide format calculators, when creating or editing your item, just make sure that the correct box is checked. So that way it can be identified as something that can be printed on during our print calculation processes. If you see a field for your item record that you just cannot identify, but you have to have, you can take advantage of our user-defined fields list for inventory records or item records. These, when created, allow you to set up a specific value in which you define a label name for that value to fall under, a field type indicating what kind of field it is and what kind of data is allowed to be entered, an input mask or a predefined available option of text, such as select or choose one. Alternatively, you can simulate a list of options by using the inward and outward carets, as well as pipe separators to break apart your different choices, noting that the first choice that you see here is what will by default be loaded, and that only the choices listed in your input mask field can be selected. The field size is a character limit, useful for text fields that allow free entry to make sure people don't enter too much text into that field. And of course, the active checkbox refers to whether or not the inventory records UDF is actually an active and available field. When adjusting inventory counts, you can use the reason code submenu to define several reasons as to why you may be making inventory balance changes for a particular location. This allows you to fill in options as open-ended or as detailed as you need them to be, and only appears in the transaction for adjustment. Now, when you're within an inventory record, you can access that through the warehouse module and see all of your available inventory through the inventory's item search page. In here, you can see all of your inventory by default with an active filter. Much like in the admin menu, you can change up the sorting options by, say, clicking the column header's name to sort in ascending or descending order, and or typing in a filtered option to allow you to filter and sort. To reset these back to their default search parameters, you can either delete the choices that you've typed in, or click the Clear Filters button to remove all selected components, and then click the Reset Filters button here to also revert the sort back to its native order. You do have a few different options for filtering. You can click the funnel icon here to change what your filter type is, such as whether or not it simply contains text rather than begins with a certain kind of text, or is exactly of a specific value or not. And if you need to search for further options, you can click the blue Extended Search button, in which you have the ability to search for inventory based on whether it's present at a particular location, any one of 3 definable user-defined field values, or by the customer code in which the inventory is stored under. To get into an item, it's as simple as clicking any one of the blue text fields. Alternatively, if you open up the Recently Visited tab on the left, your user account's 10 most recently accessed items will be available for quick access. This list transfers regardless of the computer in which you're using, meaning that if you log in at work and then were to do it from outside on a different computer, or even at home if you were to need to micromanage something while away or out sick, this list will show as the most current and up-to-date based on your recently accessed inventory. Do note that what you see in here can also include inactive items. So if you access an item, mark the status as inactive, and then save it, it will still be listed within your recently visited item records. There are 2 other ways to add inventory. Within the Quick Links dropdown of an order, there is a Quick Add Inventory button, in which, while in a job, you can add inventory to your system. And you can also do so within the print calculator of an estimate or an order. Doing so in either place prepares the item to be added to the order in which you do it through, versus adding it within your inventory module and then having it available for selection when needed. Finally, you can add inventory through the inventory app, and we'll be going over that later. Now, to adjust or fill in details of the new item in which you're adding, simply enter the record, and you'll be brought to your general inventory management screen, in which you can fill out the customer in which the item is stored under, using an in-house or self-named company if you have the need to identify inventory as being available for everybody. Providing your item with an item label or item type. Giving it a unique item code. And a name, description, and part number or customer part number that references what it needs to be. For an item which is newly created, the create date will update based on the date the item was created. Also, the version number, expiration date, and lot, as well as the kit and discontinued boxes, are mostly cosmetic. Of important note, the active checkbox here at the top allows your item to be considered active and available for use. The global box, when checked, allows your inventory to be able to be selected for deduction on any job rather than a customer-specific job. This is useful to leave unchecked if your customers are providing their own stock or if you're doing special orders for a specific customer and you don't want to accidentally use that stock for another job before this one's completed. Alternatively, by leaving an item marked as global, then it does become available for use on any job regardless of the customer. Finally, the item ID that you see up here in the top is a static value, and this is utilized with our barcode inventory system, as well as our inventory app. Under the Details tab, you'll see various areas, such as UPC code, lead time, and count per container. Some of these don't have any logic tied to them, including the 3 fields I just named and the digital asset, print on demand, and serialized checkboxes. Some do have logic tied to them though, such as the unit value, which is utilized in job costing reports, the unit of measure to allow you to define the stock unit of measure for pricing calculation, and the reorder point and quantity. The reorder point being the crossing threshold in which an email would get sent out using the global settings email reorder notification system. And the quantity listed will result in the email saying that your item's balance has fallen below the reorder point. Please order whatever your reorder quantity has been specified as. If you plan on using inventory for the print calculators, then under the Paper Details tab, you'll need to fill out some more information. Of note, the length and width, or simple dimensions of the materials in which you're using, are required. The weights and caliper are optional, but necessary if you do plan on using our cutter. The cost per 1,000 sheets, or if you're running a roll, the cost per pound or length or consumed materials is one of the many fields that are used for cost calculation of inventory on a print job. If you plan on using our wide format calculator, you'll instead need to update the weight per square foot and cost per square foot. The paper weight and paper markup. Weight isn't used currently, and the paper markup contributes towards the total cost and profitability. And finally, the cover and text bubbles here allow you to determine if you're running a job on an offset press, such as a Heidelberg, just how much ink will get used in order to complete a job. This all is compounded by the definition of a material type in which you select either sheet or roll to determine whether or not it's compatible with the press that you're trying to run your job on. And finally in here, if you build your item and you set it up on different templates for quick access within the estimates or orders, if you update your record, then clicking the Update All Templates button will make it so that way your new information here carries into templates. This can save you from having to enter and re-enter information dozens, if not hundreds of times, so it's definitely a valuable convenience here. Next up, we have a combination of related areas. We have the Quantities tab, in which how much you have on hand versus reserved on any orders will subtract to give you a total available quantity of your particular item. To note, on hand simply means how much you actually have already in the system. and reserve checks against non-equalized balances of outstanding inventory on orders. If you have an item in the system, then the Locations tab will say how much you have and where you have it. If you take a look at one of my items I have more in stock for, such as my number 9 windowed envelopes, we'll see my simple on hand versus reserved count gives me a huge overbalance. And the Locations breakdown of saying where my actual envelopes are stored, both in the warehouse and the location within the warehouse. If you handle inventory additions to your system by using a receipt process, then the receipts are stored here with transaction quantities to let you know when a certain amount of inventory was pulled into the system. And if you just handle general transactions such as adding, pulling, or relocating, you can see a full historical breakdown of every transaction that's ever occurred in your system for that item, to let your system give you an exact count of how much you have of your item at any particular location at any particular time. The dating here is useful because this also works in with some reports that we have that allow you to search for inventory transactions based on a period of time. Ultimately, what this allows you to do is see how much inventory was consumed over a period of time, and thus lets you provide documentation to your clients to let them know if you're consuming materials, how quickly you're doing it. The Substitutions tab relates to the alternate items that can be selected if inventory subs is turned on in your global settings. And in this case, all you would do is select up to 1 or 2 items for your substitution to track against, and filling in a priority number if you have multiple selected to determine which one will get accessed first. Finally, the lots system allows you to add new lots of inventory in which you select where you're getting it from, which of your vendors, plugging in a cost, and also an expiration date and invoice number if it was associated with that record. This allows you to take advantage of lot tracking, in which you deduce how you pull your inventory out of the system. By default, our first in, first out will be looking at transaction dates, pulling inventory from the location that is marked as the longest lasting non-zero location. If you intend to use lots instead, you'll have that information available as well. If you need to update your inventory's balances, you can click the Add Inventory button to, well, add inventory. By doing so, you can select the location in which you're storing the inventory at. You can type in a value in which how much you're actually receiving in, and you can fill out other info such as a lot number if needed, or an order. To complete, click Save and Close, and your new item balance has been updated with a transaction to show the addition of however much you just received, a date and time stamp, as well as the name of who did it, location in which it can be found at, and an update to both your Locations tab and your Quantities tab to reflect current balances. If you need to relocate inventory, you can click the Move Inventory button. This allows you to pick a location and pick where you're pulling it from and where you're moving it to, as well as asking you to define a quantity in which you're moving. We can see this transaction listed as a move in which we pull from one spot and add to another under the guise of moving. We can subtract inventory in here by using the Subtract Inventory button. In this case, in which we select an item in which we have a location of a non-zero value at. We can tie it to an order if needed. And we can plug in a quantity in order to indicate how much exactly it is that we're pulling. This updates our transactions list with a subtract against a specific job with all of the same information as before. And finally, we can simply make a raw adjustment to our inventory by picking the location in which we're adjusting the balance of and changing the quantity to a new value with a provided reason for the adjustment if needed, allowing us to take advantage of the system forcing the quantity to change from X to Y for that location. If we now check our locations tab, we'll see that the on-hand or quantity in that particular location is set to what we simply entered in the previous menu. A convenience is that within the item search screen, you can right-click the item record itself and do an add, subtract, or move. And of course, again, if you were to handle this within an order, if you have a deduction process established, such as applying a close date or a shipped date, or simply if you have the version deduction method turned on, then when your order has one or more than one items that are currently in your system with a quantity of more than 0, then when you do whatever you need to do to trigger the deduction, all of your inventory with a non-zero on-hand balance will show up here, allowing you to pick and choose to change where your inventory is being pulled from. Knowing that, of course, this is not in alphabetical order as defined through this process. In here, you can also adjust the quantity actually pulled, after which your reserve count will update to show what is left outstanding. And your inventory has officially been deducted in one of two ways now. Finally, within the order itself, if we do need to add inventory, I did mention the quick add inventory button. And we can find that within the quick links here, in which you have a much simpler screen to handle inventory through, but you see the gist of where you would fill out the info. And of course, creating an item in here allows you to click the new inventory item button. You can also get to a receiving process, which allows you to pull inventory in, either by clicking the quick links receive item or just the receive item button. This process allows you to pick a purchase order in which you're receiving the item against. Do note that if the PO has inventory on it that is already part of your system, those items will be automatically added after the PO has been selected. The quantity will be broken down to reflect what's listed in the PO. And you can click the Assign Put Away button to store the inventory in whichever location or locations that you need to place them into. In this process now, under the reports list, you can create a receipt and a skid flag to reference general operations after the inventory has now been received. And do note that if you need to customize any of your reports to meet any sort of aesthetic need, that can be done so as necessary through our reports edit option. After we've completed this process, we can click the Save and Close button. And if the purchase order that the items that we've received happen to be still marked as open will be given the ability to close the purchase order upon closing this receipt process. In this case now, if I were to look up my item code, now we're to check the Receipts tab, I would see receipt listed, date and time for right now, indicating that such amount of my inventory has been added to our system. And this new value, because we picked a location for the put away process, will have its quantity listed here or added into the sum of any of the other quantities. Now in this process, if you do decide to take advantage of a pickup and delivery system, you can do so using the item request feature. In here, you can create a new pickup, delivery, move, or destroy request. In this case, as you create one, the request type will be adjusted up here as freely as you select them. And you can fill out general information for your inventory's expected behavior, such as calling for a pickup, by filling out some general info, whether or not an order is tied to the process, whether or not you're simply restocking a shelf and you need to change who's doing it, where you're selecting your inventory from, and what exactly it is that you are doing any selections against. In this process, by clicking Save, you've now added at least one item to be considered pull necessary, and the reports will allow you to pull up documentation, letting you see just that. Another thing to take note in here is that you do have the ability to run an upload in which a CSV can be pulled into our system with a list of these different requests. And you can use this for any of our requests, be it a pickup, delivery, move, or destroy request. Now, inventory balances can be viewed under the Reports module, as well as within the item record itself. If you load up the item, you'll see a couple of very useful reports, in particular the Transaction Audit Report and the SKID flag, not to mention the item label if you plan on utilizing our inventory app, and the item receipt history showing you a breakdown of what's been pulled into the system and when. The transaction audit, you can run a date and time range, allowing you to pick and choose, as well as see what the opening balance versus current balance of an item is based on a particular time frame. The item label, on the other hand, is simply just that, a label in which can be cut out and placed with the inventory record on the shelf in your warehouse. So that way, if you're utilizing our inventory app, you can take advantage of its barcode scanning features to just scan the item record. The reports listed in our main reports menu can primarily be found within the inventory reports submenu. In here, we have quite a few reports, some of which are general info type reports, such as our available inventory report, in which you can see how much of all of your stocks you have in your system at any point in time, very similarly to how the quantities tab of one of your items would display itself. In this process, we can see the on-hand, reserved, and total available. And if you need a greater detail of inventory quantity management, you can take a look at the inventory reorder report. On this report, you can see exactly how much of an inventory record is required for a reorder to trigger. Taking note that the reorder point and reorder quantity must be non-zero values, Otherwise, they won't show up on this report at all. If you take a look at your inventory slot locations report, you'll see a breakdown of your items stored by location. And the inventory transaction detail report will show all of the transactions over a period of time leading up to the current balances in which you see in your system right now. We have some other reports in here. As you can see, there's plenty available. So feel free to explore these reports and figure out what works best for you. Finally, within our inventories app that can be downloaded from the Apple Store, if you download and run the app, you'll be able to be brought into a system in which you can pull, based on barcode, different pieces of inventory for different processes and transactions. Transactions made over the inventory app will be displayed through your general processes on the item records transaction table with a mark of a comment of mobile. And if we're to run through a couple of mock scenarios here, we can do so by selecting the app that we'd like to use, the inventory app in this question. Making sure that our details for our login are set up to the account in which we need them to be set up to, with the proper login, of course. And taking advantage of either the add put away feature, which lets you scan the barcode of an item or enter the item ID by number, as well as mark a location in which you'd like to store your inventory against, an order in which you'd like to tie it to, and a quantity in which you'd like to actually store. If I were to take a look at, for instance, the barcode of one of my other items, I'll put one up here on my screen just to demonstrate. We can actually take advantage of the barcode scanner by tapping the barcode icon itself, in which our camera is pulled up and our item record pulls its info. We can then select a location through a similar process or just by tapping to select. We can tie it to an order if necessary, and by entering our quantity, we can then mark that as officially in the system. In this case now, if we take a look at the item's transactions, we'll see our mobile ad of our quantity, and we can see how it triggers into our locations, sum, and quantity on hand. Similarly, we can do a subtract, pull, or move to adjust the inventory in similar ways. Only in this case now, we can actually just tap the location in which we're pulling our stock from. Again, mark it across an order if we're actually deducting this against a job. And click Submit to commit that change. In this case now, our transactions have been updated with a pull or subtract of that particular amount, which we can confirm with the mobile display. And we can look at our locations and quantities to make sure everything's updating accordingly. Lastly, in the inventory app, aside from a simple move or a find locate function, You can create new inventory by tapping the Create button at the bottom. Filling in some general info, such as typing in an item code that makes sense for what you need, picking a customer to tie it to, giving it a category or item type, marking a quantity in which has been purchased or invested in to acquire, give it a location to place it in, which is mandatory, and taking a picture of the item if needed. From here, you can click the square button in the upper right corner to create a document that allows you to print it, either an item label or skid flag if necessary, in which if you have a Bluetooth printer or air printer, you can send it off as needed. And now if you were to try to look for your just recently received item, you'd be able to find it as we would expect to find. Let's pull up a record of our inventory balance that shows us how much we have and where we have it, as well as a photo and details of the item record itself, and presenting us with the ability, again, to print off documentation as necessary. That covers pretty much everything for today's midnight inventory training. I'll go ahead and take everyone off mute and open things up for Q&A.